Well, hey there, Maura. This is so great to have you here today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I know my audience is going to love our conversation today already, just from what you and I were talking about in our pre meeting. And I'm going to turn the mic over to you now and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Hey, Shelby, it's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Welcome to my barn. I live in a small farm in Connecticut, and this is my barn. And I get the second floor, and my husband has his man cave on the first floor. So this is my domain. But this is a great topic for me. I've been a happy, sober drunk for 39 and a half years.
Oh,
It's been a long time. But I'm always remember my childhood, which was I grew up in a big Irish family. There were six kids. My mother had six kids in 7 years. God bless her. And alcohol was actually the seventh member of the family. It was present at every occasion, and it was the reliable member to help us celebrate. It was there to help us grieve. It was there all the time. And I used to come downstairs sometimes and see in the morning when everybody had been drinking, and when I got old enough, which was 13, thank you very much, I was drinking right along with everybody else. There would be the whiskey bottle right in the middle of the kitchen table with the glasses and whatever strewn around. So it's been a long road. My childhood was pretty tumultuous. Um, my father had a drinking problem that got worse when my sister was diagnosed with kidney disease in the mid 60s early on, and she was a real firecracker. Ellen was a spitfire. She was always running around, always yelling, and always climbing trees and things like that. And she grew very rapidly diminished under kidney disease, which we were told was terminal. And at that time, there was very little in the way of organ transplants that was considered the medical equivalent of walking on the moon. There was no organ procurement system. If a doctor wanted to try a transplant and wanted to find a cadaver kidney in New York State, he had to call every one of the 400 hospitals that there existed to find if do you have a kidney. It was even against the law to take kidneys, cadaver kidneys, across state lines. So if you lived 2 miles from a state line and there was one right over the line, it might have been against the law to bring it. So there was many obstacles. It was very early in this sort of medical field. And my mother, watched my father kind of fall apart. He began to have a very public affair. He became alcoholic, and she was determined to save Ellen. That was her determination. My mom was a World War II Army vet, and she was going to do it. So that's the subject of the book I wrote. But as I got into the book, which is Saving Ellen, a memoir of hope and recovery, I realized that the drinking had so much more to do with the turmoil than simply the situation. And I began to drink when I was 13. And it wasn't seen as real deviant at that time. I mean, now as a mother, I mean, it kind of blows my mind, but it was so much a fabric of our lives that nobody thought it was a big deal that a 13, 14, 15-year-old would be drinking. And in fact, at the time, it was seen as something like, well, they'll learn to handle it at home, which is not true. What it does is set you up as being more likely for problems later on, which in my case did occur. And I had an experience. I became a journalist. I went to a journalism conference when I was 28, and I said, I had begun to be worried about my drinking, and I said, okay, I'll just have one, maybe two. Well, I got together with friends. It was near Christmas. We were at a beautiful restaurant on the Annapolis waterfront. There were the lights, the ships. It was glorious. I had one, then I had another, then I had another. And in the bus ride home to the hotel where we were all staying, somebody pulled on a case of champagne, which I decided I gotta help finish this off. And so by the time I stumbled in bed, I felt so awful. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt nauseated. Every time I opened them, the room would literally spin. And I just said, I'm becoming a drunk like dad. I'm becoming a drunk like dad. It was a real kind of a come to Jesus moment. So I just stopped. I just threw the brakes down and stopped. I didn't talk to my husband about it, who was an alcoholism and drug counselor at the time. And he, the blessing for me isn't just stopping, not going to AA immediately, not doing anything like that, was that my husband, then and now, is very easy for a recovering person to live with because he's Italian. He doesn't care about drinking. He might have a beer every 2 weeks to keep his hand in. He doesn't care. So it wasn't like I was living with somebody who drank as or wanted to drink as much as I did. And I had to fight temptation every day. The temptation really kind of didn't exist, at least in our house, which helped a lot. But that's my little drunkalog and how I kind of got started and took off from there.
Thank you so much for sharing all that in such a vulnerable way. That's truly, how it works, and that's what we learn for sure. Like hearing other people's stories and learning that we are never alone in this world. There's always plenty of people, although many of the stories are so different. It took me a long, long, long time to ever even hear my story, but it's out there. So, How did you get sober? Did you use like a program or just cold turkey? What did you do?
Well, at first it was just like white knuckling it. I had been, Pete and I actually, I always say this, we met in a homeless shelter. We were not clients. We were both hired to work in a homeless shelter. And after about 3 years, I decided I wanted to be a journalist instead of, in counseling, a counselor. And so I knew about the foundations of the program. I had actually attended the Rutgers School of Alcohol Studies. And so I knew all that, but it took me a while. And I was very shy about going to AA. And it took some friends. I made friends who were also sober. I knew a couple of people who were sober, and they helped me go to AA. And it was easier to go to AA with someone. I found it, at least for me, I found it much easier to go with somebody who I could kind of tie a knot to
Mhm.
and hang on. And we don't talk often enough, I think, about the power of example. The example of people who are sober. There was a woman who had won a Pulitzer Prize and she was a journalist and I had noticed her and she was kind of my ideal of who I wanted to be like. She was an opinion writing the way I was. And when I first offered to buy her a drink before I'd stopped, she said, "No, thank you." She said, "I like life to go by its own pace." And I always remembered that and I wanted to be like her. So it helped me a lot to have an example of a person I wanted to be like, and to eventually have a friend or two and go to AA meetings. And I have never yet gone to a bad AA meeting, and it's amazing in an AA meeting, you can see other people just do these subtle little interventions to help people to say, I am with you in what for you is still a dark night. I am with you. And that's healing for me as well, even if I didn't need those interventions, just being there and having somebody turn to a. I remember one time this one woman always used to knit during AA meetings, and she had her knitting needles. She was in like her 60s, and which then to me was old. And she turned to a young woman who had stopped about 8 days earlier and had been on drugs. And she just said to her, "We're glad you're here." Just that, "We're glad you're here." And knowing you can go to a place where someone will always be able to say, "We're glad you're here," is support in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I totally agree. That's how I got sober too, because back then we only had, rehab and AA. There wasn't any other options. Like today we have all these modern things, and it's so great to see the different things emerging with Quit Lit and, Dry January and, sober programs and She Recovers. There's so many options now. We can get our hands into a lot of things depending on what fits our, desire, what our need at that time. And then sometimes we age and stage and we want something else, later. And like I always say, take like a layered approach, to things, because, we need multiple things often, not just one thing. And so whatever works, it's going to make you begin to do the work, right? That emotional sobriety
Right.
work, which is what we are here always talking about. And so, kind of like I mentioned before, I always feel like, that early sobriety work is so hard, in my opinion. I mean, it just is. There's a lot going on physically, there's a lot going on like emotionally. Usually there might even be like, might be in trouble, there might be bills to pay or legal problems or God knows what, marital issues or whatever is happening, family stuff. And so just a lot. There's just a lot going on during that first year, right? And you start to feel better. In 30 days, you're as sober as you're ever going to get, but you have to relearn. I always say we have to relearn how to live life. That's why, in AA, they do say things like it's a design for living that really works. And I truly believe that, because I know I had to relearn, how to feed myself properly, and like how to, not exercise 6 times a day or something, or like, skincare and like, just appropriate things, how to be an adult. And so once you get past that, like kind of first year time, and like that 1 to 5 year range ish, I think for most of us, there really is this like big awakening. Like kind of the fog is lifted, we start to clear out, and really begin to wonder like, oh gosh, like what do I want to do now, or who am I now? These are questions that kind of come up, or like, what do I want my life to? Because now we have options. Now we
Right.
have we have choices today now. So I'm just wondering, maybe you had that same experience, and if you can say a little bit more about what that was like for you, and kind of how that played into maybe your relationships and, um, anything else.
Well, I had a brother who I was very fond of, but he just loved drinking. And when I would start talking about sobriety, I always had the feeling that he was either going to thrust a crucifix in front of my face or get garlic and wear garlic around his neck, like warding off the vampire. So, but I always said to him, you know, it's okay. I mean, the water's fine. It's not as bad as you think. But I realized that I really shouldn't say anything unless I was asked. Because first, it's preachy and obnoxious. And second, I believe again in the power of example. He could see me. He could see that I was happy and healthy and doing my thing, and that was great. But I found I needed more work on my family relationships, in the sense that I feel like I'm such a people pleaser, and I was kind of trained that way in a way, and that was my role in the family. It helped me a lot to read Adult Children of Alcoholics,
Mhm.
that whole thing. And in fact, when I was at the Rutgers School of Alcohol Studies, the author, Janet Woditz, first gave a presentation. It was like the first time she presented her research. There's about 300 people in the audience. And you could see in different corners, she would read off something. You could hear like a shriek from this corner, and one from that corner. Was really funny. Everybody was reacting to it.
Yeah.
And some people dismiss it as being an ordinary list of neuroses, but I thought it was useful because it gives me some ideas of how I was reacting, in a way, only because I um I was accustomed to that. Instead of really giving careful thought, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to be with this person? If that person's overtly negative all the time, why do I have to be with them? Where is that written? And just questioning things that I didn't question before. And that felt like putting on a new suit, and it wasn't comfortable. But I realized it was healthy. It was learning new ways to relate to others, and new ways to be in a healthy, sober world. So, I don't know if it's like riding a bike, but I sure did need some training wheels.
I love that how you describe that, and I think that is relatable for most of us. What you're really talking about are boundaries. That's the kind of the formal term for what you're sharing, and maybe some people are already doing these kinds of things and they don't call it that. But in the kind of clinical world and and the personal development world, we do call it that. And you're right, like so many people who are living in alcoholic homes or who have any kind of like dysfunction like that, like that's majorly impactful in their families. And then even not, like maybe you just have like an over zealous mom who is sort of helicoptery or just like very anxious, or you didn't get a very secure attachment. There might be a development of people pleasing that comes, that you develop, and some of it might be even personality style too. So it's like
Right.
multiple things why that might happen. And it's very, and I think women in general, it's a generalization,
Yes.
do have a lot of this because we get that kind of bent of being nurturing and caring and want to take care of people and all that stuff. And not all women, but that's like a generalization. And so then it becomes kind of part of our culture as women or females sometimes to be like the one who does all the things, or
Right.
who's always the caretaker or always the yes woman, or and you're right, like, and then you throw alcoholism on top of it, and drug addiction and dysfunction and mental health, and it becomes really unclear about like what is my role and what are my things, my issues to deal with, and what are somebody else's. That becomes very
Right.
unclear.
Very unclear. And but at some point in our lives, with all the stuff we're doing, and I get it, we're all busy, we have to just say, what do I want? Now, if what you want to do is burn down your neighbor's house, I encourage you not to do that. But if what you want is, I just want the freedom to go away for a weekend. I just want, I want my husband to help me with the dishes. I want, I mean, it's okay. It is okay to have normal wants and needs and to meet the needs of your life without feeling guilty about it, without feeling that unnecessary, burdensome guilt that is not constructive. You don't even have to put a value on it. You can just say to yourself, it's not constructive to my life to feel this way. And to just begin to make a list and pursue a few of those things. There's nothing wrong with that. And you know what? It's your life and you have to figure out how you want to lead it and live it sooner or later.
Yeah, and I would recommend sooner in this area because we get this is a big cause of like burnout. I feel like a lot of people, particularly women, if you're trying to manage, maybe you have children or you're trying to build a career or manage, run your marriage or whatever's happening. We're busy. And so we get strung out, and when we live our lives like that, like when we become like the yes woman, or we have so much guilt and shame because of our disease, like maybe there was things that you missed out on, or
Right.
you were like not reliable before. And so parts of that like can be great. They can be a driving force towards like, oh, okay, now I do want to show up. Now I want to be the person that like helps my mom, because I want to be that for her because she needs my help. Or, I want to be a more present mom, things like that. And so there's good things about that. But if there's other parts of you that haven't resolved some of that, like shame and guilt, which is what a lot of this can be about, that's just
Right.
unresolved trauma and shame, then you might be doing things for like the wrong reasons. That's what the whole point is. If you're like always saying yes, or you're always
Right.
letting someone treat you, and because really boundaries, like the definition of it really is like letting other people know how to treat you. You're
Right.
basically teaching the other people in your world how to treat you. And so when we do that in whatever way that is, we are letting people know this is how it's okay to treat me. So for example, if you're in a relationship and you let your partner, scream and yell at you, and that's just something that's the way he's always talked to you, or maybe he's like overly critical or something, and you have allowed that for all of your relationship, it's gonna be a challenge. It's not impossible for sure, but you've allowed that to go on. So he has learned
Right.
to like that it's okay to treat you that way. It's okay, you're okay with that. And so what we do is we start to undo that, untangle
Mhm.
that through our work, like emotionally, with really great clinical work and things like EMDR and neurofeedback therapy and AA or whatever recovery materials to start to really change those thinking patterns and heal the trauma so that you can start to see, oh gosh, no, I don't, that's not appropriate. I don't want anybody to treat me that way. And so we come
Right.
back, we circle back in and we start to learn when certain things happen. I then say, "Ooh, that's not okay with me, for you to talk to me like that. Like, I don't let anybody, scream and yell at me." So we can continue this conversation, but we're going to do it like when everybody's calm, you know?
And the trouble with that, and I mean, that's a great thing. The other trouble with that is that the reaction is generally not rainbows and unicorns
Right.
because the people around you will get confused.
I always say it's one of these things where things can get a little worse before it gets better because
Mhm.
they'll try like so that's one example. But it could be another thing like work. Like say you have a job and you are pretty strung out and you're always the girl that's like your boss calls and says we have this new project and we want you to take this on and you're like okay cool and because you're like I just really want to
Right.
I want to build this career, or we have this new employee, we need you to train her, but you're like, and so you're always, or you take the calls, after 6:30 at night or 7, and you're always one, you always
Mhm.
do it. And so now you're starting to get a handle on your life. Maybe you've added something else, children or something else in your life, and you just don't want to work like that anymore. And you start to say, actually, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to take phone calls after 5 or 6, whatever. You make that rule, or you start to say no. You're going to get a pushback, right? They're going to be like, well,
Right.
what? Like Shelby always said yes to this stuff,
Right.
and they might get ugly, right? They might just start to say like, well, I don't know if you're going to be able to, keep working here or whatever. And so like
Mhm.
there are always consequences for all of our choices, good and bad. But it
Right.
doesn't mean that it's wrong to do it. You just have to figure out this is like a tightrope, right?
Right. And it's also as you mature in your sobriety, you get better at it.
So much better.
One thing that is important to make a distinction between is the difference between shame and guilt.
Yes.
Guilt being maybe what you did, and shame
Yes.
being more who you are, you
The
know?
definition of guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am bad.
Right,
So it's very,
exactly.
very important. You're right.
Yeah, and just knowing that, and I felt a lot of shame about all the drinking I did when I was so young, but, you kind of have to forgive myself for that and understand that it was the time and it was the culture and it was, family values that had gone askew. My father eventually, he didn't quite get sober, but he cut way back on his drinking, and at the
Mm.
end, the last year of his life or so, he was sober, and he just said to me he felt so guilty about the things he did that he shouldn't have, and the things that he didn't do and he should have, that he just couldn't sleep at night. And I said to him, "What, you have to sleep sometime, Dad. What helps you?" And he said, I have a rosary and I pray. I just pray for forgiveness." And seeing him at the end, kind of marinating in guilt and frankly, justifiable guilt because he wasn't that great of a father. There was terrible alcoholic scenes at home. And it really made me think. It really made me be very grateful that I had stopped at 28, um, early on before I could really make a mess of things. I had only been married about 2 years when I stopped. And it was kind of a sight to behold because he was very contrite. Didn't help me when I was 11, but it made me feel badly for him and it made it easy for me to forgive him.
Right. And so you just kind of described what that process of us of we work through emotional sobriety again in whatever form or program that you're using in
Right.
AA. It's through the steps, right? And so and that's like the formal 12-step recovery process, but you're going to be doing very, very similar work if you're in therapy or you're working through some other kind of workbook or program. Like, because what happens is we start to, we age in our sobriety, we take a look at all that stuff, and that's kind of the point of, formally again through the 12 steps, is making amends, right? So when we get to that like fourth and fifth step time, which we do
Right.
need to do things in order, right? So because if we did that like when we were 1 month sober or 1 week sober, it's probably going to be for the wrong reasons. We really do need to, give it a minute. We need to check in because we are naturally self-centered. So once we get to that space where we are ready, we have a heart posture of true repentance, right? Like we are really remorseful, and we go to the people in our lives and we say, like, look, I've had a chance to really think about this, and I'm really sorry for how I harmed you. And
Right.
again, we're not doing that for anything back to us. We're doing it to cleanse our own palate, right? And to make that
Mhm.
amends. But that person may not accept it, and they're allowed to. But then
Sure.
as you progress through, we get to, like the 10th step was is my favorite thing of all time, right? Because it's really about adulting. Like, how do you live life? How do
Hmm.
you do this, right? Well, you start to um, put in place things like boundaries. You start to have things like restraint of tongue and pen, right? We start to think before we act and speak. So now we have more discernment and ability to say, like, how would this maybe be harmful to somebody if I did that, right? And so we get that wisdom, but in all of that too, we're changing. And so your dad, like same thing for him, like he changed some, but he struggled with a lot of that guilt and from his drinking, as did you and I both. But my opinion, anyway, maybe a bit different one is, after we do get and stay sober for a long time, and we're doing this work, and we're making what I call living amends by like just not doing those things anymore.
Right.
I mean, we are anew. We are kind of clean. I mean, it doesn't change the past. We can't erase it, but we also aren't in the red anymore. Like if we've done that
Right.
work and we've changed and then we've said our amends sincerely, we get to live on the other side of it. So
Right.
then that guilt and shame is not the driving force now of our choices anymore.
And if I act like a simple jackass, I can't blame a bottle of whiskey for it. It's just me,
You're like,
you
oh,
know?
shoot, that was actually just me.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had to take a look at that and be like, oh, that was not okay. But that's the power of this though. Like
Right.
that's the power of what we get to do today, because we do make mistakes all day long, all the time, and we will mess up. We will say the thing. We will have the tone. We will, maybe even sometimes like cheat on our taxes or something, or try to cut a corner. And the beauty of being sober for a long time though and doing the work is we get that conscience that comes in, right? It helps us.
Right. It is. And, I am just so grateful. The one thing I really regret is that as a journalist, I didn't write about sobriety. I didn't write about my being sober because for about, I think the first 10 years, I felt kind of ashamed, ashamed that I had to stop, ashamed
Yeah,
that I had
sure.
gotten to that place in my life. And it took me a good 10 years to understand, you know what? I did something really cool. I stopped. There's generations of my family. If you shake my family tree, a drunk will fall off every branch. And I stopped that in its tracks, at least for me.
Mhm.
And so it was cool. And so I began to write about it, when I was maybe sober 20 years. I should have done it sooner, but at least I began to be comfortable in my own skin enough to be able to write about it. And I just wish I had gotten that comfort level years before.
I had a pretty much the exact experience. I got sober at 28 as well. I was 27. I turned 27 in rehab, and I had almost a very exact experience as far as like the length of time. Now I was doing the work. I changed a ton. Everything in my life changed. I got pregnant when I was 6 months sober. I had 3 kids in 4 years. I was doing all the things. I did all the therapy, the marriage work. I maintained. We stayed married, which is huge. And But yet there, it was just still so much. I remember, and I actually, because I shared, I celebrated my anniversary for most of those years. I haven't really done that in kind of a while now, but at my 10-year anniversary, I stood at the podium and I was pissed off. I was mad because I just felt like I was grateful. I had all the gratitude. I understood, but I didn't think it would still be this much work. Why am I
Mm,
not further along? Why am I
mm,
still here? Like I was like, what is I'm doing it. I'm showing up to the thing. Why is life still hard? You know? And I think I didn't have enough age and stage yet, even though I was probably 38 by then, right? Should have, I guess, but I didn't. I didn't have enough age and stage to know that life is hard all the time for most people,
right.
most all of us. And so I just didn't have that maturity yet. But that's the benefit of being in like an older person.
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, I have three young adults now. Two daughters are in college and one son who's still a junior in high school. But I just so want them to get a lot of this way sooner than I did, but I don't know if it's even possible.
I don't think it's possible because they live their own lives and they will, they'll get it or they won't. And what I have found as a mother is my most important thing to realize is that, I can love them, gave life to them, but they get to live their own lives and they get to do whatever. I remember my mother was very funny, and one of the joys of writing this book, and I reread a bunch of diaries I kept, back in the day, and I still keep, is how funny she was. And at one point, I was listening to her. My cousin Ruth was complaining about her daughter-in-law, and my mother said, "Look, Ruth, you sound like the mother-in-law in a comic strip. I wrecked my life. You wrecked your life. Let's let the kids wreck their lives." And every now and then I think, let them wreck their lives. I can't help it. So it's just detaching in a good way, but always being there with for them, of course.
Well, yeah, I always say I have to leave something for the therapist. I can't.
Yes.
Yeah, and no one gets out of this life unscathed. If you're a human
Right.
and you're living on Earth, you're going to have hard times. They're going to have the terrible thing. You're going to have the tough times. You're going to have the great times. And the joy is wonderful. And most of us, I guess, feel like it's that more than the bad, or else maybe, I don't
Right.
know, most of us wouldn't make it. So we feel like there's more joy or more times of peace, or it's more valuable to us to have that than the bad times. And so we just keep doing it. But when we don't do the things that we know are going to keep us well, like when we don't have good spiritual fitness, for me, that's extremely important. And I think
Right.
that's actually been a highlight of the last maybe 5 years for me personally. There's been a real change. I mean, it's always been there, but it's really been, A, I'm older. B, I feel like that has been a big area where I've invested a lot of time and energy. And then also the boundary work that I've put in place, particularly in my relationships, but also just in my relationships, I guess specifically in like what I allow and don't allow, um, has been the most valuable for me. But I do think you're right. Like I don't want to take away the opportunity for them, my kids, to build like resilience, because that's how it happens. Like, you can't take away their pain, even though we want to, because they need that in order to get to the other side.
Right.
I just want, and kind of my prayer always is that they will get a lot of this like sooner in life. But maybe they will, because I started drinking heavily alcoholically, kind of, whatever, at 17 or 16, whatever time. And so then my emotional growth got stunted right at that point. And so I lost like 10 years
Mm-hmm.
and didn't really start maturing until 27, and I was only 16.
Right.
So maybe they'll have a fighting chance of being better off.
Right. Well, we can all hope so, right? And as you say, leaving a little for the therapist isn't a bad thing.
I mean, like, and that's what I always tell I mean, everybody has, no matter, there's no perfect family, no
Right.
perfect parents, no perfect people. And so no matter what, even in the best of families, which there are many families that are great, they're doing great things, there's still the one thing, or it's
Mhm.
just there's internalization of the way a one child handled something like, your same words, your same discipline strategy might have been internalized by one of the kids as very traumatic and harmful to them and created a negative thinking pattern, right? Whereas another one was like, well, whatever, okay, it didn't matter to them, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
and so that all just gets developed in their own way from their personal process and their experiences that they have.
Yeah, it's always a different prism. They're born with different lenses
Yeah.
than we have. And guess what? We're older and I don't live in Buffalo anymore, and even Buffalo isn't the town that I grew up in, way back when.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this is the life that I've shaped, so it's going to be different, and that's okay. All I know is one of the best decisions I ever made in my life was to be sober, and it made everything else happen. My drinking did not encumber my career, and I ended up working for the New York Times and had a lot of fun, a lot of fun, wrote a lot of stuff and got to see a lot of the world, and I can look back on it and say, well, at least drinking didn't screw it up.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing the life we can create. And yes, when we get and stay sober, um, we get the opportunity to be well, and unfortunately, not everybody gets that. And I think I try to remember that very regularly too. And then another thing I really have been focusing on too, and maybe this is relatable, is just the minimization I think that a lot of us do of like of showing up in life. You know, um, people will, I myself included, I mean, I was like a perfectionist. I mean, kind of like a wackadoodle, crazy mom, always had to have all things, you know, very driven, schedule oriented, all the things. But, you know, I would be hard on myself the first time something wasn't like great, or my kid forgot the thing, or I messed up, or, and I think it's easy to be like, well, I'm a terrible mom, or I'm not a good worker, or I let my spouse down, or my parents, and all this stuff, and start to get into that cycle of like, I'm not enough, or I didn't do it, and like instead of realizing what I
Judgment,
say to a lot of people is like, some people like you got up and you showed up and you were in service to your family today. Like you showed up and you woke up and you got out of bed and you showed up for your family. A lot of people don't.
right?
And I think I know it sounds dramatic, but it's very true. And so I've been really focusing on that and sharing that so often to help other people realize, yeah, this is a struggle with life, but you're here. Like you showed up.
Right,
You came to therapy today. Look at you.
right,
You know?
exactly. And just showing up for those little things and not being passed out on the couch or whatever
Right.
is a big deal.
It's a
It's a
miracle.
big deal. It
It's a
is.
miracle.
It is.
Yeah. So, where are your kids today? They're older.
Oh, well, they're great. I have two take no prisoners granddaughters. One is 6, and she just never stops. I feel like I've run a marathon every time I babysit her. And the other one is 2, little Riley and Ellie, and my daughter, they're my daughter Anna's. She works for a medical device company, and my son Tim, who I named after my two favorite men, my brother Tim and my husband, is a high school history teacher in a kind of an inner city high school in Hartford. And he loves his kids. They're mostly lower income, and he loves them, and they love him, and it's fabulous. I mean, he's doing the great work every day, just being there for his kids. So they both are, I'm real proud of them, but I'm proud of who they are, not what they do. I don't care what they do as long as they are good people, you know? And, I've been married 41 years now. Pete's still, hanging out with me, still has his 1 beer a week or whatever it is.
Oh,
And
40 years.
it's been
Wow.
it's been good.
Yeah, you're a real warrior there.
I don't know how it happened. I can't explain it.
I know. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Well, I know your book is coming out. Why don't you just give us like the quick synopsis of the book a little bit more, and like I know you did a little bit in the beginning, and just like where people can find it and when.
Saving Ellen, a memoir of hope and recovery, goes into my crazy Irish blue collar childhood in Buffalo, New York, and lots of drinking and lots of struggles at the end to get sober and do that. Ellen got sober also, which was great.
Oh,
Um, And I got sober first, and that's the power of example. She got sober after me. She said, if you could do it, I could do it. And I said, absolutely right. So we were able to be sober together. And you'll meet my family, my very funny family, and somewhat dysfunctional, but there you are, aren't we all? And that's going to be available April 1st from Skyhorse publishing company, and anywhere you want, Amazon or Barnes and Noble or your independent bookstore. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's amazing. Well, Maura, I really appreciate your time and your energy today. This has been a great conversation. Where do you like people to reach out and find you if they want to?
Well, I have a website, Casey Inc., CASEYINK, like the ink you write with, caseyinc.com.
Okay.
Also author M Casey at gmail.com is great. And I'm here in Connecticut. I'm going to be doing my own little books tour in Buffalo and in Connecticut. And I will offer sparkling water and coffee at all books, at any bookstore I go to. Forget about the wine, people. You're not going to get any with me. But maybe some sparkling apple cider if they're very lucky.
That's amazing. I love that. I'll make sure
Yeah.
I link to those sites below. And so, best of luck with the book. And
Hey,
thank you so
thank you.
much for your story and for the message of hope that we all got to hear and just living, an amazing sober life. You get to do that today. Thank you.
Isn't that a great thing? Every day is new,
It's a blessing. Thank
clear
you so
headed.
much for your time. Appreciate it.